Hi there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to yet another cracking installment of the Matt Brown Show. With me on the line all the way from the US is none other than Emeran Mayer, distinguished research professor at UCLA and author of The Mind-Gut Connection, How the Hidden Conversation Within Our Bodies Impacts Our Mood, Our Choices, and Our Overall Health. So quite an interesting conversation we're going to have here today. So Emeran, thanks for your time. Great to have you here.
Well, thanks for having me on the show, Matt. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't you give our audience around the world the elevator pitch about who you are, what are you about? Kick us off.
So I've been a faculty member at UCLA, University of California in Los Angeles, for my entire career. I'm a gastroenterologist and clinically who have seen hundreds, maybe thousands of patients with chronic abdominal pain over the years. I have pioneered the concept of brain-gut interactions early on in my career. It was actually one of the areas that drew me into medicine, believe it or not. And I've pursued this topic both clinically and also in research, studied everything from single cells, from making up nerve cells in the gut, in the enteric nervous system, all the way to the brain. And the last 10 years, a big focus has been on the role the microbes in the gut play in this, what we call brain-gut microbiome system. And the mind plays a big role in this. Most people don't realize that whatever goes on in our mind is reflected in the gut and its microbes, as esoteric as this may sound. And on the other hand, whatever goes on in the gut makes it to our brain and influences many processes that are not conscious, but nevertheless are very important and can lead to disease states. So this is where I'm today. I'm director of the Center for Neurobiology of Stress and Resilience at UCLA and founding director, we're just getting this off the ground, of the Goodman-Luskin Microbiome Center at UCLA.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for that. There's a lot to get into with you today. I want to start with why. So why does this conversation matter so much for, not only entrepreneurs and business executives, but, everybody? Why is this particular conversation around, the mind-gut connection so important today?
Well, I would say, it's always been encoded in our language to make a decision based on your gut feelings or have a gut reaction. Thinking through your gut, it's kind of remarkable how often, if you pay attention to it, this term comes up in daily conversations by top athletes, politicians, business leaders. And I'm not sure how that, term was coined a long time ago, but certainly it refers to something that people can make decisions in two ways. I mean, you can call it intuitive decisions or gut-based decisions, where somehow we bypass the complicated machinery in our brain that is a linear, high-powered linear computer that looks at the advantages and disadvantages of decisions, individual decisions. It's a slow process, as opposed to making a gut-based decision, which can happen in seconds. You don't even know why you made it this way. So I think for business leaders to understand this at a little bit deeper level, I think is important.
Mm. So what in your research and perhaps in your book demonstrates the power of this connection?
Well, so there's many reasons for that. If you go to a sort of a really big picture in evolution, the first animal in the oceans of the world was this tiny little marine animal. It was essentially a floating digestive tube with an opening on both sides. And that tube was wrapped into a net of nerve cells. And so that was the first origin that, how our organism started, a nervous system that's attached to the gut, basically. And over evolution, this has involved in two things. One is we have now an enteric nervous system that's still wrapped around our gut that regulates our digestion. But all the higher decision making has sort of moved into our big brain, and the two of them remain in close communication. So this goes back billions of years in evolution, this close relationship. So it's still there today. And we know today that many communication channels connect the microbes in the gut and the gut with the brainstem and then higher cortical centers. It's a communication with multiple chemicals, inflammatory mediators, and we don't see it, we don't hear it, but we feel it and we see the consequences. If that system is programmed well, it's another thing, it's programmed early in life, the first 3 years of life. If that system is programmed well, it will it will be beneficial for you to be able to listen to your gut feelings and ultimately make your most important decisions if you trust your gut. If this early programming is compromised, could be a variety of factors, by antibiotics during development, by chronic stress, the wrong food. If it's programmed the wrong way, you will be stuck with that system for the rest of your life. It will make biased decisions, and it will predispose you to many chronic diseases, from depression to, all the way to degenerative brain diseases like Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease. So it's something I'm always fascinated by, that we don't see it, we don't feel it, we don't see the contractions, we don't see. There's 100 trillion microbes in our gut, and they're invisible, and they live in total darkness. They live without oxygen. So it's kind of fascinating that there's something inside of us that we don't see, and until recently I've not really appreciated, that its existence.
So your book here, I brought it up on screen for everybody. It's called The Mind-Gut Connection. You can get it on Amazon. It's got a ridiculous amount of 5-star reviews. So clearly this is resonating with humans around the world. Humans are amazing creatures, aren't they? But I want to maybe double click on the point that you made around this idea of listening to your gut, because I for a long time, my mom, I would, whenever I was going through like a thing, like a existential life crisis when I was like 18 or whatever, my mom would tell me, just listen to your gut. Listen to what your gut telling you, and I'll be like, I don't know, what are you talking about, Mom? I just want to make a fucking decision here, bro. And then, I never quite understood this idea of like, listen to your gut. And there's a lot of misunderstanding that, listening to your gut is a spiritual thing. It's like the Holy Spirit or whatever, moving through you. And so, I don't subscribe necessarily to those labels, but I do believe in this idea of a connection to something that is intelligent and that is, within you. And so in this context, it's about this idea of the connection, as you say in your book, between the mind and the gut. But I'm curious to unpack this for our audience. So how do you listen to your gut? Like, it's like I listen to my, like if you eat something bad, it's very immediately like obvious afterwards why that was a bad thing to eat, but if it is like, what do we mean actually? What do you mean actually by listening? And in what way should you listen? And what are you listening for, and why? Like, why should I listen to this connection, if you like?
Yeah, so to unpack this, there's really a couple of components. So there's this term gut feelings. Um, this is probably something that goes on all the time, that information is being sent from the gut to the brain. And if you learn to pay attention to it, you'll feel the butterflies in your stomach, or the rumbling, or the having a knot in the stomach. So these are gut feelings that everybody can tune into. So these are, and the way this happens, your brain comes first. You get upset, you get anxious, you worry about something. The brain sends signals through this brain gut axis to your gut. And when I say gut, it's always the gut and its microbes. And it changes, it sort of creates a mirror image of that mindset at your gut level, which you won't see. And then there's all these sensors in your gut that feed back that information into your brain, into your conscious brain. So it's really a circular communication, starting in the brain, maybe subconscious worry, expectations, goes down to the gut, is translated into chemical language, is picked up by sensors in the gut. And 90% of this communication between brain and gut is from the gut to the brain. So it's being sent back up. And if you tune into it, you will perceive it with these gut feelings, and some people are better than others. And generally, women are better than men, better tuned into listening to these sensations from the body in general, but from the gut in particular. So that's one loop, this one mechanism. The second one is that mechanism happens to your brain gut microbiome system from age 1 year old. So I mean, you could almost say from the time you're born. And that information that goes up to the gut is not just there to create this gut feeling or gut sensation. It's also stored in a huge database in your brain. It's so like this supercomputer that we have that records both a sensation and an image of what happened at the time. So I compare this in my book to these supercomputers that now many companies use, like Google, Netflix, and you only need to. So I always compare this. You only, like with Google, you only need to type in the first 2 letters of a word, and it will know what you are interested in, and it will give you all this information that's related. So that's what we think happens with this gut-based decision making. You don't have to go through this lengthy process in your cortex about, oh, this is good. I mean, the numbers, and then get statistics. And if you can just access this vast database in your brain, it won't give you numbers. It will just give you, should I do this? Yes or no? Is this a good idea? Yes or no? It gives you the overall integral of those many moments in your life that you have gone through when you made bad and good decisions. I mean, that's obviously a model that we have currently, in science and in philosophy. We often use models of the highest technology that we're dealing with. I mean, at some point it was the machine and the car, and definitely at the moment it is the supercomputer. Our brain would probably outperform all the existing supercomputers, not in quantity, but in programming, how it puts things together, and how it extracts things. So if you imagine a big screen, millions or maybe billions of little video clips with an emotional quality attached to it, and you can access that instantaneously. Particularly if you train yourself, if you've grown up, if your parents always told you when you had a big decision to make, well, make the list, make the plus minus list, then you're probably not used to making these gut-based decisions. If your mother told you follow your heart, you're probably much better tuned into this. And so it is kind of fascinating, how something as obscure and dark as our gut would play a role in this very sophisticated process that we now compare to a supercomputer.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm curious to unpack with you is, why this has been such an overlooked aspect of health. Because if you think about health in general, what typically is prescribed is like a healthy diet and exercise. So if you, healthy diets now like pick your country, take America, for instance. I'm moving there like next month. So health in America in general, QSRs, quick service restaurants, supersize me, it's like my wife still said to me the other day, she's like, we're going to have to really watch what we eat when we get to America because, of the perception that obviously everybody can maintain their own health, but in general, people are not healthy in terms of their diet. They're overweight. So in fact, they're overweight, they don't exercise, life gets in the way, you wind up with, gym subscriptions from January because you thought, New Year's resolution, I'm going to get my 6-pack back, and then life happens, the baby gets sick, you get sick, like I got COVID a couple weeks ago, and then suddenly you're stuck with a gym contract you don't use. So you're getting overweight, you're not eating properly because now you're feeling sorry for yourself, you're fatigued. So when I get fatigued, I tend to eat more rubbish because I don't know why. It's just a biomechanical
Comfort.
Yeah, it's comfort. It's like a bit of certainty, and especially as an entrepreneur, like I get a lot of certainty from food. So I love cooking, and so my point being is that this relationship between health and diet is well known, oftentimes not followed through. And more importantly, to your point in your book, the relationship between, exercise and diet and mental health is like, it's a big deal. People lose businesses. I know a lot of people who lose businesses. They lose people who, leave their team. Lots of shit happens. And you go into depression. And so the first thing a doctor will do is prescribe to you an antidepressant, right? Because, it starts with a pill, ends with a pill. We got a pill for everything. We have a pill literally for everything. Would you like to keep pushing? Cool, have a benzo. Have a benzodiazepine because it's awesome. But meanwhile, the problem, to your point, and this is where I'm going with all this, is that it could actually be a problem that's, based in your gut health. Like one of the things that's been going around South Africa is this very persistent, stubborn sinus. You can still hear, I've still got a bit of it, but it was like I got it before COVID, but it was so stubborn. Like I went through 3 courses of antibiotics and it was still there. It's still here now. Then I got COVID, and then I started to meet people and started to talk to people about share my experience. They were like, yeah, but I also have this thing. Like I don't get sick, and now this thing won't go away. And so a lot of preamble there, but the reason why I'm mentioning all of that is because the one thing that I don't know anything about, and that could be the solution to this, is gut health. Like if you're taking so many antibiotics and antidepressants, and then you're taking, nasal decongestants, then you're taking, like sinus stuff and this and that, like the one thing you're not paying attention to is like this gut thing. So my question to you is, what do you know that most people don't know about the relationship between, your gut and the mental health part of life?
Yeah, so I mean, there were a lot of things that you mentioned I could sort of take off on.
Yeah,
I
go
personally
for
had
it. Take off. Go where
personally
you
had
want
an
to go.
experience, went to my annual checkup, and I was amazed. So first of all, it's like a 15-minute conversation with a general practitioner, and then there was no mention in this conversation of how much I exercise, what I eat, how I sleep, like all these things that I'm really, studying and writing about were completely absent. And then at the end, there was a slight abnormality that was picked up in this evaluation. And he said, okay, so here's here's the medication you should take. And as I said, I'm not taking this medication. I know exactly what I can do about this with changing or adjusting my lifestyle. And so that was kind of a reminder to me how the regular medical system really views the body. There's algorithms that are taught in medical school. If this is slightly off, take this pill. If this is slightly off, take this pill. In the meantime, so we've talked a lot about the supercomputer. That analogy is in some ways correct, but a supercomputer wouldn't need this regular maintenance and wouldn't have this ability that you can influence it with lifestyle. It's a silicon-based machine. That you don't need to feed it anything to perform optimally. Our body, and particularly this, what we call this brain gut microbiome system, is a plastic shapeable entity. So it's a living supercomputer that can be influenced by, I would say, this diet on top of it, because diet goes down your intestine, goes to the microbes break it down into smaller molecules. These smaller molecules are then sent to the brain and literally to every part of the body. So you're talking about your sinuses, those, secondary messengers that are produced in your gut in response to your food are distributed throughout your body, including the brain. So the brain has many receptors that respond to these signals. And so this is one thing so for example, if you eat this standard American diet, which has been abbreviated as SAD with the acronym SAD, we know now that it will change the gut microbial composition and relative abundances. And it will also change, for example, the microbes that are responsible for creating this tight barrier between the inside of your gut and the outside immune system. And so your diet can lead to what's been called a leaky gut, which doesn't mean that there are holes in your gut, but it's that this tight barrier is become more permeable to molecules, in particular molecules that are inflammatory. So just a micron away from your microbes in the gut is the gut-based immune system. So I've written my second book just on that topic. And the gut-based immune system, 70% of your immune system is in the gut, microns away from all these trillions of microbes. So if your diet nurtures a population of microbes that are not good for this tight barrier that separates your immune system from the gut, then you get a chronic engagement of your immune system at the gut level, and it doesn't stay there. It travels throughout your body, to the liver, to the heart, to the brain. So today we know many diseases. I mean, depression is one of them, but heart disease, coronary vascular disease have all been shown to have this inflammatory component. And the question initially was colon cancer. Where does the inflammation come from? Well, we know today the inflammation most likely originates in the gut from this disturbed interaction between your microbes and the gut-based immune system. So you could almost say that system may be responsible, maybe the major risk factor for all these chronic diseases that we're dealing with today that didn't exist 75 years ago, or very small amounts. And for these diseases, we don't have cures. We have medications. So the pharmaceutical industry loves this group of diseases because there's no cure for them other than a healthy lifestyle. But we have many medications that can sort of counteract this inflammation. So I'll give you one example, with the guidelines that people have about, cholesterol. Was a study in the UK that showed that almost 100% of men at the age 70 meet the criteria to have to take one of these statin drugs. Um, if you imagine that, so at 70 today we're still very vital, and executives and business leaders, that you would accept the fact that 75 to 100% have this chronic inflammation and need to take a medication is ridiculous. Um, lifestyle changes. So we could say today we wouldn't need any further science. We sort of know how to do it. It is the lifestyle change in the great majority of patients. But science will reveal many exciting aspects of it, and science will generate material and IP for a lot of people to develop startups to target individual components of the system. But right now, if you ask me what can I do to optimize this major regulatory system in our body, I would say, diet, exercise, sleep, a balanced and mindful mindset are the four things that will do most of the job. But for some people, that's not so easy. People today are confused. You go to the internet and see all these different types of recommendations. What kind of diet? What kind of exercise? Is walking enough for an hour a day, or do you have to do a performance exercise? So there's a lot of confusion, and I've been trying in my role as sort of as an educator of the public to really hit this home. But I mean, I can't compete against influencers with 500,000 followers who promote some crazy stuff that has no evidence behind it. So.
It is, to your point on that, lots to get into on that last statement there. But certainly, I'd like on social media, it's ridiculous. Like the amount of misinformation that's out there. There was a Dove ad that I saw recently about they put a mother and a daughter in a room, and then they connected the daughter's social media accounts to an AI program that's a deep fake. So they took scanned the mother's face, and then they superimposed it on influencer videos on Instagram. So then they played these influencers, and they're like, oh my God, definitely like do this, and like, and then you might do this and this and that. But now the mothers, and they're like, oh my God, I did not say that. Mom's like, I did not say that. And then the moment the moment the daughter and the mom realize actually what information is the daughter really consuming about beauty, and just because it's delivered from somebody else doesn't mean that information is any good. And you've got these young children, these women who are exposed to this information all day with little to no supervision. And the whole idea was, be careful about the information that you consume, because it's rampant out there. And to be honest with you, like, it's so hard to know who to trust. Like you said, an influencer's got 500,000 followers. Like, who cares? Like, why is that a thing? Why does that matter? Who are you actually? Because certainly, if I went on and I banged like on this show and I recycled all the things that about mind gut health that I say in this episode, and I promote it, and I take you out, it doesn't make me more qualified if I have a bigger following than you. You understand? So this information conversation is so important. What's your advice to people who are suffering with ailments? I've got my uncle suffers from fibromyalgia. It's a horrible thing. It's really, really bad. I'm sure you know what it is, but there's like no cure for it. There's no cure for it. And 1 in 2 people commit suicide because you are always sick. And if I was I don't understand how he is so positive every single day. His name's Steve. I'll actually send him this interview to watch. if I was in a situation, I would be looking for any reason, anything at all to get out, or I must explore alternative methods or information that could give me a new perspective on what I could potentially seek as a treatment to my my disorder, right? So my question is, what's your advice to someone like Steve who is suffering at the moment with ailments that aren't going to be cured through traditional, or not traditional medicine, but pharmaceutical grade stuff? Like, it's good to cure the symptoms, but it's not going to solve the problem there. But if Eastern medicine has believed what you now are showing the world through your research, that there is this connection, what's your advice to Steve? Like, how does he approach this information overwhelm? Who should he trust? What should he do?
Yeah, so it's a very interesting question. So as somebody who has worked at one of the best university hospitals in the US, throughout my career, I clearly would say in the beginning, if you have symptoms, you should see a physician and make sure there's not something underlying these symptoms that we have good treatments for. In this case with fibromyalgia, it's not very likely that he will get this answer, but I would still start with, going to the best physician that you can have access to. After that, it gets more difficult. So there's places, for example, I'm subscribed to this Harvard University newsletter, or the Massachusetts General newsletter. They have informative courses on a lot of these topics that we've been talking about, and they generally are very well informed. They go definitely way beyond what your doctor tells you, into the lifestyle and evidence-based treatments. Then you can go further. Then you kind of leave the territory of evidence-based medicine, and there's the whole traditional medicine, obviously, which includes Ayurvedic and traditional Chinese medicine and other natural healing, remedies. That area is interesting. I'm sure there's a lot of things. I know we're discovering today things like, turmeric is, for example, has been around in Ayurvedic medicine for thousands of years, and now we're all excited about turmeric all of a sudden. If you this is one thing I do. If something has been around for thousands of years and has not disappeared, it's likely that there's some benefit to it. That's not always true, but I think it's the evidence that the people that make the supplements provide is usually does not meet the criteria that I would want to see for a medication, for a heart medication or something. Then there's also the whole thing about, these natural healers. I mean, there's a tremendous, particularly in these chronic pain conditions, the placebo response, which in medicine we look at this as an enemy because it sort of makes it difficult to know if a drug is better than placebo. If it's not better, then we don't accept it. We know from partly our own research, but from talking to other colleagues, the system in the brain that creates the placebo response is a very sophisticated system, very important, a self-healing mechanism of our body that is located in the brain, and that we can engage if you interact with with healers that can generate this placebo response. In my opinion, if it works, it's not a bad thing. I mean, if your pain gets better because now you're taking something, herbal medication, that may not have the scientific backing to it, but that is recommended to you by somebody that you trust, and if you get better, that's what I always tell people. If you take something and you feel better, don't stop taking it. It's so there's a wide range. I mean, I would say, right now, and then there's a few people like myself, or there's a few other people who what's called functional medicine. So these are people trained looking at the body in more interconnected terms. I like their philosophy. They spend an hour evaluating you. What they recommend is often, their way of making money is selling their own supplements, many of them. So that's sort of the downside, so unfortunately, I can't give a single answer to the person who looks for the information, but I think going first by a reputable physician, by a reputable university, what they put out in terms of the information. And I think of all the information sources I've looked at, I think these Harvard newsletters are probably, and courses are probably the best ones. And then from then on, you sort of leave the real evidence-based, and you go into tradition, what's been around long enough, and is the person who delivers that, is that really a trustworthy healing person? One example, of what has happened in psychiatry, as you probably know, there's been this explosion of interest in compounds that also have been around for thousands of years, these psychedelic botanicals. They've been used by natives and indigenous people in the jungles of South America, literally for thousands of years, for healing ceremonies. And now all of a sudden, after they were banned for 50, 70 years, we're finally discovering that they're very powerful agents that we now try to apply to many of our intractable medical and psychiatric problems. And the same with cannabis. It's been banned to do research on that, and what's coming out now is it's not limited to just being high or stoned on it. They have and it always goes back to the fact, if you look at the research, there's systems in our brain, in our body, that are responding to these compounds, to these botanicals. There's thousands of plants around them, so just listed two, but there's many others around. You look at the brain, they have specific receptors for specific, botanical compounds. So I ask myself, why is that? So because we have co-evolved with natural systems, with plants and with the environment, with microbes. So we have the systems, we just haven't unlocked them. I think we'll see a lot of this coming out in the next 20 years, 10 to 20 years. And I think there will be a lot bigger progress in terms of really making an impact with these chronic diseases, more than with these pharmaceuticals that just suppress the symptoms, that do not really.
Yep. So look, I think one of the things I came across recently, to your points around this explosion of, psychedelics and mushrooms and, ayahuasca and all these kind of things, was an interview I saw recently with Paul Stamets. I don't know if you know who he is. He's the world's leading expert on fungi. And one of the things that was really interesting that I learned from him is that our best antibiotics, like penicillin, actually come from fungi. Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
Isn't it crazy?
Yeah,
it's ridiculous. So for me, it's like we're in this antagonistic situation where on one side you've got modern medicine, on the other side you've got traditional stuff. And we kind of disconnected from fungi and, traditional medicine, like, whatever it might be, mushrooms or nootropics is another thing that I've experimented with before. And I can tell you, if I take in lion's mane mushroom and I take however many milligrams it is, I feel great. I feel naturally high, and so I know that it works, this thing, but I know there's a connection there, you understand? But it's so interesting to hear you speak, because for me, it's very obvious. It's either you take something like a painkiller like penicillin or morphine to kill your pain. But on the other hand, I've also encountered stories where it's possible to operate on a human, literally like cut them open with zero medicine, and they don't feel anything. There was a guy called Tony Quinn, Irish guy, and he actually researched this. He was trying to understand the relationship between the conscious mind and, to your point, this unconscious response, meaning you have the supercomputer in your unconscious. There's a connection to your body, right, and your gut and so forth. And so, as part of his research, what he discovered was at car accidents, this medical, he was interviewing doctors and stuff, and one of the doctors was literally in a response. So someone would have a car accident, come off a bike, broken leg, broken shoulder, cut head, and the injuries were such that they needed to operate there. And this doctor was telling Tony that he was actually able to operate on people without any medicine. And it's because when they were in this fight or flight response, which is totally unconscious, ingrained within us from thousands of years of running away from things that want to kill us, in this unconscious mind state, if you remove the conscious mind and the role of that to not everything, but a large of it, and you just want to live, if you're in that mindset, you can cut someone and stitch them and they won't feel anything. And it's fascinating to, this is what I'm saying. There's this unconscious response, there's, fungi, and then there's modern medicine. And we're sitting in this middle, uneducated largely, and being prescribed stuff. Like I got prescribed like Augmentin, and there was another antibiotic. And after 3 hours, like, what the hell? How do you take 3 antibiotics and not get better? I don't get it. So I went for a C-reactive protein test to see what my inflammation levels were in my blood. And you know what it was, Emeran? 1. Meaning I had no bacteria. So why am I being prescribed more stuff, when it's not working, dude? It's not working. So I'm curious now, people take antibiotics all the time, especially with COVID. And then, Joe Rogan got to the whole thing. We got into a whole bunch of hot water around what he was taking when he got COVID, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so my question is, if you're taking all of this modern medicine stuff and you want to kind of reconnect to your natural natural self in terms of your body's ability to respond to infection and stuff, are you able to actually reprogram your gut health? Like, is that a thing? And how do you do that?
Yeah, certainly, sort of starting with the antibiotics. I mean, it's too bad that you got these 3 courses of antibiotics, because they not only targeted potential bacteria that you had in your respiratory system, but they also made it down to your gut bacteria. And typically, if you have 3 hits with antibiotics on your gut microbes, they will either take a long time before they bounce back to their normal level, or they won't come back completely. That's particularly if you already have a weakened system to start out with. So the damage that's done by these repeated antibiotic doses, even worse if it's done in children when the system still develops, is still being totally neglected, which is amazing to me. So with this other, I mean, clearly on the other hand, I mean, antibiotics are probably one of the best medications ever developed. They come from microbes, so it wasn't our idea; it was nature's idea to come up with these. So they've saved millions, hundreds of millions of lives. It's just the way they're being used, not with the strict indications were they actually helpful, but 90% of the time used for indications that are either viral infections or just are these chronic diseases that don't respond to an antibiotic. So your question was, can you regenerate like the harm that has been done from these treatments that you have gone under? So there's still this belief that when you take antibiotics, you should also take at the same time probiotics that will attenuate this negative effect on your microbes. And there's conflicting message. There's one very good study out of Israel that showed that if you take probiotics after an antibiotic treatment, it will actually take longer for your own microbes to come back. Somehow these probiotic organisms delay the return of your food. That's controversial. People are still debating this. I always recommend, and there's good evidence, going on a diet that is high in naturally fermented foods for a while, like for a month. That has been shown in people even without antibiotics to increase the diversity and abundance of your normal gut microbiome. It has this interesting effect. It's not only the organisms that are associated with that fermented food, but it brings in other ones as well. We don't know where they come from. So if you want to do something, do a booster of your gut microbiome, go on that, add this to your diet. Could be anything, or ideally a combination of sauerkraut and kombucha and kimchi and so a variety of things that people have used for thousands of years. In humans have used. Humans developed those fermented foods not to enhance the health of your gut microbes, but for preserving food. But we know today that this is something that has this, in some ways, unexpected benefit. We don't know if probiotic pills are doing the same, so that's not clear. But I always recommend go the natural route where we have the evidence already, and sort of bring these numbers back up. And then once the numbers are back up, feed them with a large variety of plant-based foods to provide other beneficial food for the microbes, which are many fiber, and then a group of molecules called polyphenols that are all targeted at the microbes. So this is always, it makes it sound like really easy. Why is a largely plant-based diet so healthy? It's because it has all the things in it that the microbes love and thrive on, and increase their diversity.
Because it's from the ground, dude. It doesn't come from a processed refinery somewhere. So I want to come back to this, and especially the kids' story, because I got 2 young kids, so I need to know now. Just some comments from social media. Brent Tolman says that your book literally changed his life. So that's pretty cool. I've got Paul Mullis here, is the president from Rillian in New York. He says processed foods and excessive alcohol consumption are the root to so many health issues. Couldn't agree more. And then to our conversation earlier around the American diet, he calls it SAD, the standard American diet. Didn't even know that was like a thing. But anyway, thanks for the comments, guys. Keep them coming. Going back to children. Please explain to me and our audience with kids this idea that you write about in your book in terms of the importance of early childhood in gut-brain development and what parents can do to help their children. Very curious about that. Please take as much time as you need. What is that all about? Unpack it for us.
Yeah, so early childhood, I would say this includes pregnancy, development in utero, because we know that a lot of things that the mother does to her microbiome, like the same things, the healthy diet, trying to avoid chronic stress, will be transmitted to the developing fetus through the placenta. So all these molecules the microbes produce, the mother's microbes produce, can make it into the fetus's developing brain. So by the time this baby is born, it has already been exposed to these microbial influences from the mother and the mother's lifestyle. And there's data to say that, for example, mothers who have metabolic syndrome, meaning one of these chronic inflammatory diseases, diabetes, and that they have an increased risk of having an autistic child if there's together with the genetics. So this chronic inflammation during pregnancy will be transmitted to the developing infant, and will have, certainly not by itself, but together with a genetic predisposition, will increase the risk. So it starts before. Then delivery, C-sections for cosmetics or convenience reasons have become very popular in parts of the world. I think Italy and Brazil are leading the rate of C-sections. So that's important because the birth canal is the first environment that the newborn is exposed to in terms of the microbial world. And the microbial world is, in that case, from the mother, both from the intestinal tract, but also from the vagina. There's changes at the time of delivery in the microbial composition of the vagina. Stress of the mother, for example, we know this from animal experiments, changes the microbial composition. So that first exposure that this infant that comes into the world is heavily influenced by how the mother lived, what microbes the mother has, and does the baby go through this birth canal or come out through a C-section, is not exposed. So we know that the microbiome of the newborn with C-section is different from the one that came through a vaginal birth, but then it catches up after a year. So after a year, you don't see a difference anymore. But what happens during that year is very important because that compromised microbiome a C-section born baby has for 1 year produces now chemicals that affects all kinds of other systems in the body, particularly the immune system. So there's an increased rate of asthma, an increased risk of autoimmune diseases in this baby, even though when you measure his or her microbiome, it's the same as somebody who's born, naturally. So that first year of programming, extremely important. During that time also, breastfeeding. So the recommendation now is 1 year minimum of breastfeeding. That's important. Generally it's important because of the nutrition. So it's human breast milk is more nutritious. But in addition, there's molecules in human breast milk that are very important for the developing microbiome in the baby. These are very large molecules called human milk oligosaccharides, big sugar molecules that are not nutrition because they can't be absorbed by the baby. They go down into the large intestine, then they are broken down, digested by the microbes, and they play a big role in this programming of the baby's gut microbiome. So if you don't have, if a baby is raised with formula feed, it will not get this. So the formula feed does not contain those programming molecules, these so-called HMOs. That's sort of come up in the public discussion because in the US, the shortage of formula products, it's been in a crisis mode. I didn't realize that some 15% of women cannot provide breastfeeding in adequate amounts. So I didn't know that they either do it less than a year or they don't have enough breast milk, or so 15% of babies already grow up without that naturally developed system of programming. There's also I forgot to mention this, antibiotics. In animal studies, if you give 1 dose of an antibiotic to a pregnant mother, just 1 dose, that will affect the microbiome of the mother and the developing infant. So we have this, it's a very crucial time. We always think about, for babies, that the nutrition is the most important. Well, in some parts of the world, yes, where there's undernutrition and starvation, but in developed societies, where we're now concerned about these chronic diseases, all these factors that I mentioned to you, play a big role in determining if later in life you will have many of these rapidly growing chronic diseases. Allergies, like when I was in training, something like peanut allergies didn't really exist. So now we have allergies for all kinds of things, and the number keep increasing. We do believe today that a lot of this has to do with this early programming, this interaction of the microbes with the immune system in the baby's intestinal tract. So once the breastfeeding period is over, the same recommendations apply to the baby as we recommend to adults. A largely plant-based diet is definitely the diet of choice, and should be. I always call it the default diet. Clearly, if you have developed an allergy, you don't want to add peanuts to this, or you have some other intolerance of a food as a child. But most people tolerate most plant-based foods, with the exception maybe of a handful of exceptions. So I packed a lot of this into this. It's a very intense period, this starting 9 months before delivery, and definitely going through the first 2 years of life. And we're not following, I think science has outpaced clinical practice and education amongst mothers. I think many of the things that I told you, mothers are not aware of that, because the gynecologists or their pediatricians has not followed those cutting edge science and made the recommendation. That it's kind of a unfortunate thing.
Yeah. I must say though, the healthiest I've ever felt was when I basically ate vegetables, fish only, no red meat, nothing processed, no sugar, no dairy, like only literally, if it didn't come out of the ground, doesn't go in my mouth. And I did that for 26 days. I had so much energy. Like when I walked, I felt like I was being pushed. That's how much my cells were, responding to this connection between my diet and my mental health and the supercomputer and like everything else that goes on with, with your body that you have no idea about. So I can't recommend what you said there enough. Like if you can go, not vegan necessarily, but like, don't cut down on like meat every day. Like South Africa is like, massive red meat culture. Like how much biltong and boerewors and steak and lamb can I shove down my mouth at a braai? It's ridiculous. But try to get my wife though to do that. She's not going she's not cutting out red meat. She's Portuguese. So that door's closed, Emeran. Okay, it's closed. So cool. Let's wrap this up, man. So maybe two things to wrap this up. So what's your hope here? I mean, you've obviously written this book. You're the leading, researcher and professor in this space. What's your hope for this book? What do you hope is the change you will create?
Yeah, so this book and the success with the book and the popularity came unexpected for me. I mean, I was deeply immersed in my research grants and, teaching students and talking to my colleagues, speaking at meetings. When this book came out and I saw how popular it is and how popular the topic is and how many people are now living in that space that I don't think are transmitting the correct information, I've become very passionate of spreading this to as many people as possible in every possible way. With we're working on a documentary film for the American PBS public broadcasting service on this topic. Working on a masterclass. So my main focus will be on these education, and if I could sort of look forward, I would hope that what we see now on the coasts in the US, that a lot of young people are changing their habits. I mean, clearly the exercise and healthy diet and away from like dairy products and red meat consumption It's remarkable. It's almost revolutionary. You know how many vegan restaurants. I mean, I'm not a vegan. I do promote a traditional Mediterranean type diet. But I hope that this trend will continue, and I hope that I'll be able to contribute to this development, and convince as many people as possible to choose a lifestyle which is not only good for us, for our own health, but also good for the environment. I mean, we didn't mention that, the added benefit that you get with from pursuing a healthy lifestyle yourself, particularly a healthy diet, is that it has a tremendously positive effect on the environment. The destruction of the rainforest on the Amazon is largely driven by the insatiable beef, consumption in the US and other countries by McDonald's and other companies. So yeah, my hope is that this, what I call the One Health concept, becomes ingrained in everybody, in schools, from the earliest time on, in classes or educational opportunities for pregnant mothers. You would almost think that that's where you should put most of your money, in schools, and in teaching mothers that bring new generations into this world, because that ultimately will have the biggest ripple effect downstream. If you're going to be successful in this, I mean, there's obviously the obstacles and the forces against it are tremendous, both in terms of some of the lobbying by food companies, by large food companies. The agribusiness is it's a daunting task, and it's a daunting challenge that you take on. And then we have this rapidly evolving climate change. Are we going to do these things fast enough to make a dent into this current situation? I think we're on the we're rolling into something that's not going to get better right away, but I'm optimistic that the consciousness is gradually changing amongst young people, and hopefully will spread throughout the world as well.
Well, I commend you for taking on a challenge like that, because there is a consciousness that's developing, I would say. I think the world is certainly moving towards a direction, to your point, that is more consciously minded and health orientated and curious about do I need to take this drug, or is there a better alternative that's more natural? And I think unconsciously we know that the natural is kind of where you want to go. Like at some point, like if I gave you a red pill and a blue pill, like in Matrix, and I said, okay, the red pill's modern pharmaceutical shit, and then the blue one is, natural, but they'll do the same thing. What are you going to choose?
Yeah.
You're going to go to the natural stuff. Like I would. I mean, maybe there'd be outliers, be like, no, give me the modern and screw natural, but that's cool, whatever. But again, I think you're at the forefront of this conversation, and so I want to commend you for that. So it's been a real privilege to have you on the show, Emeran. I think we could probably spend another hour getting into all the sorts of things that we, have touched on. But the book is called The Mind-Gut Connection, guys. Go and get it on Amazon. It's a read I will definitely now do. So, Emeran, thank you for your time today, but it's been great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Matt. It was a pleasure. Anytime.
Yeah, likewise, man. Maybe I'll look you up over in the States and we'll do something together again.
That'd be great.
Awesome. Have a good day, mate.